In the vast history of Westeros, few names strike as much awe and fear as Balerion the Black Dread, a creature so colossal, so ancient that he became the embodiment of raw, unbridled power. His black scales shimmered like onyx under the sun, and his eyes burned with a fiery intensity that reflected the destruction he was capable of. At full wingspan, Balerion cast a shadow that could engulf entire towns. His mere presence was enough to silence armies and turn the bravest warriors into trembling souls. Balerion was more than just the largest of the Targaryen dragons. He was a living weapon of conquest, an unstoppable force that helped shape the very foundation of the Seven Kingdoms. When Aegon the Conqueror arrived on the shores of Westeros, it was Balerion who carried him across the skies, a sight that would become the stuff of legend. Together, Aegon and Balerion forged the Iron Throne, a seat of power created not just through politics, but by Dragonfyre. The flames that melted the swords of Aegon's enemies into a twisted, jagged throne came from Balerion's breath, marking the dragon's indelible role in uniting the Seven Kingdoms. Balerion was already old by the time Aegon rode him into battle, his size dwarfing even the other great dragons of the time, Vhagar and Meraxes. His massive wings and thick body made him slower than younger dragons, but what he lacked in speed, he more than made up for in sheer power. When Balerion unleashed his fire, entire keeps crumbled, forests ignited, and even stone walls melted under the intensity of his flames. Perhaps his most famous act of destruction was the annihilation of Harrenhal. The towering castle, once the largest and strongest fortress in all of Westeros, was reduced to a smoldering ruin when Balerion's fire turned its stone towers to ash, killing Harren the Black and his entire line in the process. The melted remains of Harrenhal stand as a testament to Balerion's might, with the castle's twisted stone walls serving as a grim reminder of what Dragonfyre can do. But Balerion's legacy extends far beyond the wars he won and the castles he raised. He was the symbol of House Targaryen's dominance over Westeros, a living testament to the blood of old Valyria. His bond with Aegon was the stuff of legend, a relationship forged in the fires of conquest. And yet, Balerion's story didn't end with Aegon's death. After Aegon, other Targaryens would ride the Black Dread, though none wielded him with quite the same effect. Maegor the Cruel was perhaps the most notorious of Balerion's later riders. Known for his violent and tyrannical rule, Maegor used Balerion to crush his enemies and consolidate his hold on the Iron Throne. The sight of Maegor atop Balerion, raining fire and death on those who opposed him, became a symbol of fear that would haunt Westeros for generations. It was said that Maegor's enemies could see Balerion's black form on the horizon long before they felt the heat of his fire, and by then, it was already too late. Despite his fearsome reputation, Balerion was not invincible. As the years wore on, the great dragon began to show signs of age. His once mighty wings began to slow, and his movements became more ponderous. The last Targaryen to ride Balerion was King Viserys I, but by that time, the Black Dread was a shadow of his former self. Viserys rode Balerion only once before the great dragon succumbed to old age. Balerion's death was peaceful, an unusual end for a creature of such violence and destruction, making him one of the few dragons in Westerosi history to die of natural causes. Balerion's skull now rests in the Red Keep, a silent monument to the beast that once dominated the skies. Measuring large enough for a person to stand inside its open jaws, the skull is a reminder of the Black Dread's incredible size and power. It's difficult to imagine the kind of force needed to bring such a creature into submission, but Balerion was never truly subdued. He was a force of nature, one that eventually met the only enemy he couldn't defeat: time. But Balerion's story lives on in the myths and legends of Westeros. The small folk speak of him in hushed tones, telling tales of the great black dragon who could blot out the sun with his wings. They say that when Balerion flew overhead, you could feel the heat of his breath even from miles away, and that his roar could be heard in every corner of the realm. To many, Balerion wasn't just a dragon. He was a god of fire and fury, sent to remind men of their mortality. For the Targaryens, Balerion was the embodiment of their power. They had other dragons, yes, but none could compare to the Black Dread. His name alone was enough to keep the lords of Westeros in line, knowing that defying the Targaryens meant facing the wrath of Balerion's fire. His very existence solidified their rule and made it nearly unassailable for generations. And even in death, Balerion's legend grew. His name became synonymous with the Targaryen dynasty, and no other dragon, no matter how fearsome, would ever quite match his legacy. There have been many dragons throughout history, but few have left as lasting an impact as Balerion. He wasn't just a tool of conquest, but a force that shaped the world around him. His flames created the Iron Throne, his fire reduced castles to ruins, and his very presence inspired fear and awe in equal measure. Balerion the Black Dread was more than a dragon. He was the manifestation of power, destruction, and the undeniable will of House Targaryen. His memory endures in the minds of those who tell the tales, in the melted stone of Harrenhal, and in the shadow of the Iron Throne he helped create. Drogon. Among the dragons of Daenerys Targaryen, one stood out for his size, ferocity, and undeniable connection to his rider. With black scales streaked by deep red markings, this beast became a force of nature, larger and more aggressive than his brothers. His growth, unchecked by the confines of captivity, made him the largest of Daenerys's dragons, a symbol of her rise to power and a devastating weapon in her conquests. From the moment he first unleashed his fiery breath, it was clear that this dragon was destined for something more than the simple role of a pet or companion. His flames were a tool of war, helping Daenerys claim victory in the Battle of Meereen, and later playing a crucial role in her defense of Winterfell. But it wasn't just his strength that made him unique. It was the deep bond he shared with Daenerys. She wasn't just his rider, she was his purpose, guiding his every action through battles that would determine the fate of kingdoms. This bond was on full display during the most pivotal moments in Westeros. In the destruction of the Lannister army, his fire annihilated scores of soldiers, turning the tide of battle in an instant. Later, during the infamous sacking of King's Landing, his fire reduced the city to ash, toppling the Red Keep itself. He wasn't just following orders, his actions reflected the raw emotions of his rider, a shared fury that engulfed the city in flames. The devastation was a testament to the power he wielded, a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, could stand against the might of a dragon fully unleashed. Yet, there was more to him than destruction. His intelligence was undeniable, and nowhere was this clearer than in his final moments with Daenerys. After her death, he didn't lash out at her killer, Jon Snow, despite having every reason to. Instead, he chose to burn the Iron Throne, the very symbol of the power that had driven his mother to madness. In this act, he displayed a level of awareness that set him apart from others of his kind. It wasn't a random act of destruction, but a calculated one, as if he understood the twisted allure the throne held over Daenerys and the chaos it had wrought on Westeros. This final act left a profound impact on those who witnessed it, as well as the countless who would later hear the tale. While many saw dragons as little more than beasts of war, his actions suggested a deeper intelligence, a level of understanding that went beyond mere loyalty to a rider. He chose to destroy the throne, a decision that hinted at his grasp of the true cost of power. Despite the violence and destruction, his story ends on a note of quiet dignity. Carrying Daenerys' lifeless body, he flew eastward, disappearing into the unknown. His destination remains a mystery, but the image of a dragon flying into the distance with his rider in his claws is a haunting reminder of the bond between them. While his fate is uncertain, his legacy is etched into the history of Westeros, much like the burn marks he left on the Red Keep. As a dragon, his strength and size were unparalleled, but it was his loyalty and intelligence that made him truly remarkable. He wasn't just a force of destruction. He was a living, breathing embodiment of Daenerys' ambition and vision for the world. Together, they forged an unstoppable force that changed the course of history. Yet, in the end, his final act showed a wisdom that transcended the chaos and carnage they left behind. In his story, we see the full scope of what dragons represent in Westeros: power, loyalty, and the capacity for both great destruction and unexpected restraint. His journey from a hatchling to the most powerful creature in the known world is one of the most striking tales in the history of dragons. The scars he left on the landscape and in the minds of those who survived his wrath serve as reminders that while dragons may be controlled, they are never fully tamed. His legacy, like that of his rider, is a complex one. Their victories were built on the backs of burning cities, shattered armies, and broken thrones. Yet through it all, he remained steadfast at Daenerys' side, loyal until the very end. The question of where he flew after her death may never be answered, but his place in the story of Westeros is unquestionable. He will forever be remembered as the fiercest of Daenerys' dragons, the one who carried her to power and watched over her in her final moments. While his name may fade into legend, the mark Drogon left, both figuratively and literally, on the Seven Kingdoms, will endure. In every ruin he left behind, in every tale told of his might and fury, the legacy of this dragon remains as fiery and indomitable as the creature himself. In the shadow of his larger, more aggressive sibling, Rhaegal stood as a quieter but no less significant figure in Daenerys' campaign for the Iron Throne. His emerald green scales, accentuated by bronze markings and wings the color of a setting sun, made him a striking presence on the battlefield. While his appearance was regal, it was his loyalty and strength that earned him his place in the heart of Daenerys' army. Though less fearsome than his brother, Rhaegal had a vital role to play in Daenerys' conquests. His involvement was not always as loud or as destructive as Drogon's, but his presence was just as essential. In the Battle of Winterfell, where the living fought the dead in a struggle for survival, Rhaegal took to the skies alongside Drogon. Together, they rained fire upon the Night King's forces, a moment that echoed the earlier devastations of Harrenhal and King's Landing. Yet, where Drogon embodied fire and fury, Rhaegal symbolized balance, flying with precision and restraint. It was this restraint that ultimately allowed Jon Snow to form a unique bond with him. In a pivotal moment, Jon rode Rhaegal into battle, a powerful symbol of his hidden Targaryen lineage. While Daenerys had long controlled the skies on her own, Jon's first dragon ride added another layer to the growing complexity of their shared story. Rhaegal, who had been Daenerys' ally in so many battles, now became a part of Jon's story as well, linking his heritage and his destiny to the world of dragons. The bond between Jon and Rhaegal was brief, but deeply significant. In that moment, Jon was more than just the king in the north. He became a part of the Targaryen legacy, tied to the power and majesty of the dragons. Much like Daenerys' own relationship with Drogon, Jon's bond with Rhaegal marked him as more than just a leader of men. It tied him to the ancient bloodline of old Valyria. The sight of Jon riding a dragon for the first time was a moment of awe, a visual confirmation of his place in the Targaryen lineage. Yet Rhaegal's story, like so many in Westeros, was not destined for a peaceful conclusion. Despite his loyalty and the strength he brought to Daenerys' forces, his life was cut tragically short during the battle at Dragonstone. It was an abrupt and shocking end, one that left Daenerys and the audience reeling. Struck by one of Euron Greyjoy's scorpions, Rhaegal's majestic flight came to a sudden, brutal halt. His death marked a turning point in Daenerys' campaign, one that would send her spiraling further into the madness that would define her final days. Rhaegal's death was more than just a loss on the battlefield. It was a personal blow to Daenerys, already reeling from the loss of trusted advisors and close companions. Rhaegal's death left her with only one dragon, symbolizing her increasingly precarious hold on power. With each loss, Daenerys' grip on her vision for the future of Westeros began to slip, and Rhaegal's death felt like the final crack in her resolve. This loss fueled a prominent theory among fans that the death of Rhaegal was a crucial trigger for Daenerys' eventual downfall. Many believe that Rhaegal's sudden death, so close to the loss of Missandei and Jorah Mormont, drove Daenerys into a state of emotional instability that ultimately led to her devastating actions in King's Landing. The theory suggests that without the symbolic and literal support of both her dragons, Daenerys became unmoored, unable to control the intense grief and rage building inside her. Had Rhaegal survived, some speculate that Daenerys might have remained more grounded, potentially avoiding the catastrophic turn at the end of her conquest. In many ways, Rhaegal's end was a tragic reflection of the larger themes that ran throughout Game of Thrones. Power, loyalty, and legacy were central to the Targaryen dragons, and Rhaegal's death illustrated the fragility of even the mightiest creatures. He wasn't brought down by a battle against another dragon or a fearsome opponent, but by the mechanical ingenuity of men, a reminder that, in the end, no one, not even dragons, is invincible. His sudden, violent death contrasted sharply with the legacy of older dragons like Balerion, who had died of old age after shaping the history of Westeros. For Jon, Rhaegal's death marked the end of his short-lived connection to his Targaryen heritage. While Jon's place in the story of dragons was important, it was fleeting, a momentary flash that, like Rhaegal himself, was not meant to last. In a world where alliances shifted and power was always in flux, Rhaegal's bond with Jon felt like a passing moment of hope, one that ended as abruptly as it began. Yet despite his tragic end, Rhaegal's legacy is one of loyalty and strength. He may not have cast the long shadows of Balerion or Drogon, but his presence in the story of Westeros was profound. He carried Jon Snow into battle, fought fiercely against the Night King's forces, and remained a steadfast ally to Daenerys until his final breath. His death, while shocking, served as a reminder of the high stakes in the battle for the Iron Throne, and the cost that even the mightiest must pay in the pursuit of power. As we reflect on his story, it becomes clear that Rhaegal was more than just a dragon. He was a symbol of the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. He flew through the skies of Westeros with the strength of a kingmaker, yet fell to a single strike from the ground. In this way, Rhaegal's journey mirrored the fate of so many of Westeros's greatest figures, soaring high above the rest, only to fall when they least expected it. With creamy white scales and gold markings, Viserion was a striking presence among Daenerys' dragons. His wings, with their unique mix of red, orange, and black, and his piercing green eyes, made him a distinct figure in the skies. While he was never the largest or most aggressive of Daenerys' dragons, Viserion held his own as a vital part of her forces, a symbol of her power and the bond she shared with her dragons. His story, however, took the darkest turn of any of Daenerys' children, marking him as one of the most tragic figures in the world of dragons. Viserion's fate shifted dramatically when he was killed during Daenerys' attempt to rescue Jon Snow and his group from beyond the wall. Struck down by the Night King's spear, his death was a heartbreaking moment for Daenerys, who had already come to see her dragons as extensions of herself. But the loss of Viserion wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning of something far more sinister. In a moment that shocked both Daenerys and viewers alike, Viserion was resurrected by the Night King. His creamy white scales took on a ghostly, undead hue, and his once fiery breath became a deadly blue flame. As a white dragon, Viserion became a symbol of the Night King's power and his ability to corrupt even the most majestic of creatures. The reanimation of Viserion was a chilling reminder of the Night King's dark magic and the overwhelming threat he posed to the living. Once reanimated, Viserion's role shifted from ally to enemy. He was no longer Daenerys' loyal companion, but a tool of destruction in the hands of the Night King. His most devastating act came when he used his blue flames to breach the wall, a centuries-old barrier that had protected the Seven Kingdoms from the dangers of the far north. The destruction of the wall, an event that had been prophesied and feared for generations, was a turning point in the series. It allowed the Night King's army of the dead to invade Westeros, unleashing chaos and destruction upon the living. Despite his transformation, Viserion's new role did not go uncontested. During the Battle of Winterfell, he faced off against his former companions, Drogon and Rhaegal. The sight of Daenerys' dragons battling their once brother was a tragic and haunting moment. Viserion, once a symbol of Daenerys' strength and her connection to the old Valyrian magic, had become a weapon of death and decay, further highlighting the devastating cost of the war between the living and the dead. Viserion's eventual destruction came not through battle, but as a consequence of the Night King's defeat. When Arya Stark delivered the killing blow to the Night King, the magical connection that kept Viserion alive was severed, and the once mighty dragon collapsed. His death, while not as dramatic as his rebirth, was a necessary part of ending the threat of the undead. It marked the final end of a dragon who had once soared through the skies of Westeros, now reduced to a tragic pawn in a much larger game. A popular fan theory that surrounds Viserion's story explores the idea that his death and subsequent resurrection were foreshadowed much earlier in the series. Some believe that the show subtly hinted at Viserion's fate through Daenerys' 3 dragon eggs, with Viserion's creamy white scales symbolizing his eventual role in the icy cold north. His transformation into a white dragon breathing cold blue fire is seen by some as an extension of the symbolic connection to ice. While this theory doesn't change the tragic outcome, it adds an intriguing layer of foreshadowing to Viserion's arc, linking his destiny to the larger themes of fire and ice that define the series. Viserion's journey from a loyal companion of Daenerys to a creature of the undead reflects the larger battle between life and death that defines Game of Thrones. His transformation serves as a powerful metaphor for the way war corrupts and destroys even the most beautiful and powerful beings. Though he began his life as a symbol of Daenerys' ambition and the future she sought to build, Viserion's fall into the hands of the Night King marked a dark chapter in the history of dragons, one that would not soon be forgotten. Viserion's death, both in life and as a white, was more than just the loss of a dragon. It was a profound emotional blow to Daenerys. Losing one of her children to the Night King was a devastating moment that underscored the immense personal cost of the war she was waging. And while the Night King's defeat brought an end to Viserion's tragic arc, the scars left behind by his transformation and destruction were felt long after his final breath. In the end, Viserion's story is one of loss of loyalty, loss of self, and the ultimate loss of life. His transformation into a white dragon forever marked him as a symbol of the Night King's power, but his death at Winterfell, alongside the Night King, restored a sense of balance. Viserion's legacy is bittersweet, a reminder that even the most powerful and awe-inspiring creatures are not immune to the dark forces that haunt the world of Westeros. Vhagar's name is etched into the annals of history as one of the most powerful and influential dragons ever to soar over Westeros. Though she began as the smallest of the 3 legendary dragons, alongside Balerion and Meraxes, her longevity and strength elevated her to become the largest living dragon by the time of her final years. Her immense size and power left an indelible mark on the history of the Targaryens, making her a key figure in both the Targaryen conquest and the bloody civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons. During the Targaryen conquest, Vhagar was ridden by Visenya Targaryen, one of Aegon the Conqueror's sister wives. Together, they helped forge the 7 kingdoms into one, securing House Targaryen's dominance over Westeros. Vhagar's fire played a pivotal role in key battles, most notably the Field of Fire. Alongside Balerion and Meraxes, Vhagar unleashed her devastating flames upon the armies of the combined Reach and Westerland's forces, securing a decisive victory for the Targaryens. This moment was one of the most defining in the conquest, where dragons proved themselves to be the ultimate power in Westeros. As the centuries passed, Vhagar's role in history only grew more significant. While initially smaller than Balerion, by the time of the Dance of the Dragons, Vhagar had become the largest and most formidable dragon alive. Her participation in this brutal civil war between rival factions of House Targaryen was crucial, and her rider during this time, Prince Aemond Targaryen, wielded her power with deadly precision. Aemond's bond with Vhagar was one of the most iconic partnerships during the dance, with Vhagar being a devastating force on the battlefield. The bond between Aemond and Vhagar came to define much of the conflict. As one of the most fearsome Targaryens, Aemond used Vhagar's strength to crush his enemies, and their actions during the war left a lasting impact. One of the most significant moments came when Vhagar killed Arrax and Lucerys Velaryon. The battle, fought in the skies over Storm's End, saw the smaller Arrax stand no chance against Vhagar's might. Vhagar's victory in this duel had far-reaching consequences, fueling the already burning flames of the Targaryen civil war. The death of Lucerys marked a turning point in the dance, escalating the conflict into an even bloodier struggle for the throne. Vhagar's final moments were among the most dramatic in the history of dragons. In a climactic duel over the God's Eye, Vhagar faced off against Caraxes, the dragon of Prince Daemon Targaryen. This battle wasn't just a clash of dragons. It was a deadly confrontation between two of the most powerful Targaryens in history. The battle was fierce, with both dragons delivering devastating blows. In the end, Vhagar and Caraxes perished together, plummeting from the sky into the waters of the God's Eye. The riders, Prince Aemond and Prince Daemon, also died in this fateful clash, marking one of the most tragic and significant events in the Dance of the Dragons. A particularly interesting theory regarding Vhagar ties into the idea of fate and the Targaryen bloodline. Some fans speculate that Vhagar's role in the Dance of the Dragons was inevitable, a dragon bound by destiny to participate in the civil war that would ultimately fracture the Targaryen dynasty. This theory suggests that Vhagar, like many of the dragons, represented the unyielding power of House Targaryen, but also its downfall. Her final battle with Caraxes and the death of her rider Aemond symbolized the self-destruction of the Targaryens, dragons fighting dragons, kin fighting kin, leading to the ultimate decline of their house. Vhagar's death marked the end of an era. The last of the dragons from the original conquest, she had witnessed centuries of Targaryen rule and fought in some of the most defining battles in Westerosi history. Her loss was more than just the death of a dragon. It was the symbolic end of the Targaryen dominance over dragons. With her death and the eventual decline of the Targaryen house, the dragons that had once ruled the skies of Westeros faded into memory. Yet, Vhagar's legacy lived on in the stories told of her power and might. From the Field of Fire to her final deadly duel with Caraxes, she was a dragon that left a lasting mark on history. Her size and strength were unmatched in her time, and her presence on the battlefield was enough to turn the tide of war. Even in death, her name would echo through the halls of history, a reminder of the heights of Targaryen power and the inevitable cost of their civil war. For the Targaryens, Vhagar was more than just a weapon. She was a symbol of their dominance, their ability to control forces greater than themselves. Her participation in both the Targaryen conquest and the Dance of the Dragons tied her to the rise and fall of the Targaryen dynasty. And while Balerion may be remembered as the mightiest of all dragons, Vhagar's story is one of endurance and legacy, a testament to the power and tragedy of dragons in Westeros. Meraxes, a towering figure in the history of Westeros, was a dragon of immense beauty and power. Her silver scales gleamed in the sunlight, and her golden eyes gave her a regal, almost ethereal presence in the skies. Her size alone made her one of the most formidable dragons of her time, large enough to swallow a horse whole. Alongside Balerion and Vhagar, Meraxes played a critical role in the Targaryen conquest, helping to unite the Seven Kingdoms under Aegon the Conqueror's rule. But it was her tragic death that would come to define her legacy, a loss that would resonate deeply within House Targaryen. Meraxes was ridden by Rhaenys Targaryen, Aegon's sister-wife, and together they forged a powerful bond. Rhaenys and Meraxes became a fearsome duo, their combined strength helping to conquer much of Westeros during the early days of Aegon's campaign. Meraxes was a symbol of Targaryen might, her fiery breath leaving destruction in her wake as she soared above the battlefield. Whether it was reducing enemy fortresses to ash or routing armies with a single pass, her presence on the battlefield was enough to shift the tide in favor of the Targaryens. One of the most notable moments of Meraxes' involvement in the Targaryen conquest came during the Field of Fire, where Aegon's forces faced the combined armies of the Reach and the Westerlands. Alongside Balerion and Vhagar, Meraxes unleashed her fury upon the opposition, their combined flames devastating the enemy and ensuring a Targaryen victory. The Field of Fire was a defining moment in the Targaryen conquest, solidifying their reputation as unstoppable with dragons under their command. It was a display of sheer force, one that echoed through history as proof of the dragon's unmatched power. However, it was during the First Dornish War that Meraxes' story would take a tragic turn. The Targaryens, emboldened by their victories, turned their attention to Dorne, a region notoriously difficult to conquer due to its desert terrain and fiercely independent people. Rhaenys, riding Meraxes, led the Targaryen forces into Dorne, seeking to bring the kingdom under Aegon's control. For a time, it seemed like their efforts might succeed, but the Dornish resistance proved to be far more tenacious than the Targaryens anticipated. The death of Meraxes came as a devastating blow during this campaign. While attacking a Dornish stronghold, Meraxes was struck in the eye by a scorpion bolt, a massive projectile designed to pierce a dragon's hide. The bolt penetrated her skull, killing her instantly and causing her to plummet from the sky. The impact of her fall killed Rhaenys, who had been riding her at the time. This marked one of the most significant losses for the Targaryens during their conquest and highlighted the vulnerabilities of even the mightiest dragons. Meraxes' death was more than just a military defeat. It was an emotional and symbolic blow to House Targaryen. The loss of one of their three dragons, especially a dragon as powerful as Meraxes, was a reminder that dragons, while incredibly strong, were not invincible. The death of Rhaenys only compounded the tragedy, leaving Aegon and Visenya to carry on without one of their most beloved family members and one of their greatest weapons. The death also deepened the rift between the Targaryens and the Dornish, as it became clear that Dorne would not be easily subdued. There is an interesting theory that suggests that the death of Meraxes wasn't just a stroke of bad luck, but rather a carefully orchestrated plan by the Dornish. Some speculate that the Dornish knew of Meraxes' power and had specifically designed the Scorpion Bolt to target her. According to this theory, the Dornish had been studying dragons from the beginning of the war and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. The fact that the bolt hit Meraxes directly in the eye, a small, vulnerable target, has fueled speculation that it was not a random shot, but a calculated one. Whether or not this theory holds any truth, it adds an additional layer of intrigue to the circumstances surrounding Meraxes' death, painting the Dornish as a cunning and resourceful enemy. Meraxes' death would have lasting consequences for House Targaryen. It became a turning point in the First Dornish War, forcing Aegon to reconsider his approach to conquering Dorne. Without Rhaenys and Meraxes, the Targaryen forces were left weakened, and the war dragged on without a decisive victory. Eventually, Aegon would abandon his attempts to conquer Dorne, a testament to the strength of Dornish resistance and the heavy cost of losing Meraxes. Despite her tragic end, Meraxes' legacy as one of the great dragons of Westeros endures. She played a pivotal role in the Targaryen conquest, her fire instrumental in bringing much of the realm under Targaryen rule. Her death, while devastating, also highlighted the limits of power, even for creatures as mighty as dragons. In many ways, Meraxes' story serves as a reminder that the power of the Targaryens was never guaranteed, and that even the most powerful forces can be brought down by cunning and persistence. Meraxes' name continues to evoke a sense of majesty and tragedy. Her silver scales and golden eyes, once a symbol of Targaryen dominance, now represent a tale of loss and vulnerability. Though her time in the skies was cut short, the impact she made on the history of Westeros remains undeniable. Whether remembered for her role in the Field of Fire or her heartbreaking death in Dorne, Meraxes' story is one that lingers in the minds of those who study the history of the dragons and their riders. Caraxes, also known as the Bloodworm, was a dragon that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who faced him. His nickname, earned from his blood-red scales and serpentine, elongated body, perfectly reflected his fierce and violent nature. Unlike many of his dragon kin, Caraxes wasn't just a weapon of war. He was a living symbol of House Targaryen's ruthless ambition and power, particularly in the hands of his infamous rider, Daemon Targaryen. His legacy, much like his fiery breath, was one of destruction, and his story is deeply tied to one of the bloodiest conflicts in Westeros, the Dance of the Dragons. Before becoming the Mount of Daemon Targaryen, Caraxes was ridden by Prince Aemon Targaryen, who helped establish the dragon's reputation as a fierce combatant. Even in his early years, Caraxes was known for his aggressive temperament and skill in battle. Aemon and Caraxes fought valiantly together, their bond cementing the dragon's place as one of the most formidable creatures in the Targaryen stables. However, it was his later bond with Daemon Targaryen that would make Caraxes truly legendary. Daemon, one of the most notorious and ambitious members of House Targaryen, chose Caraxes as his steed, and together they became one of the most fearsome duos in Westerosi history. The Bloodworm, with his long serpentine body and ferocious demeanor, matched Daemon's own unpredictable and dangerous nature. Daemon was known for his ruthlessness and relentless pursuit of power, and Caraxes became an extension of that ambition. Whether raining fire on his enemies or engaging in aerial combat, Caraxes embodied the fury of his rider, earning his place as one of the deadliest dragons in the Dance of the Dragons. The Dance of the Dragons, a civil war that tore the Targaryen dynasty apart, saw Caraxes in the thick of the bloodshed. His role in the war was significant, with Daemon using him to devastate enemy forces and seize strategic strongholds. Caraxes' fearsome reputation grew with each battle as he unleashed his fiery breath upon armies, cities, and castles alike. One of the most brutal confrontations during this time was the destruction wrought by Caraxes during the attacks on Targaryen-held territories, where his terrifying presence in the skies signaled the doom of those below. Yet, it was the final battle of Caraxes' life that would cement his place in the annals of history, the infamous duel above the God's Eye. In this climactic confrontation, Caraxes went head-to-head with Vhagar, the largest and most powerful dragon of the time, ridden by Prince Aemon Targaryen. The two dragons were titanic in size and strength, and their battle was one of the most destructive and consequential moments of the Dance of the Dragons. The skies above the God's Eye were lit ablaze as Caraxes and Vhagar clashed in a violent display of power. Their battle was as much about the rivalries of their riders as it was about the dragons themselves. Daemon, ever the bold and fearless warrior, engaged Aemon with a ferocity matched only by the dragons they rode. Caraxes, despite being smaller than Vhagar, fought with unmatched tenacity, proving that the bloodworm was not a dragon to be underestimated. The two dragons locked in a deadly struggle, biting and tearing at each other as they plummeted toward the waters of the God's Eye. In a final dramatic moment, both dragons met their end. Caraxes managed to mortally wound Vhagar, but the injuries he sustained were too great for him to survive. As they fell from the sky, their massive bodies crashing into the waters below, the legacy of both dragons came to a fiery conclusion. Daemon and Aemon, locked in their own personal vendetta, perished along with their dragons, marking one of the most tragic and legendary moments of the Targaryen Civil War. Caraxes' death was not just the end of a dragon, it was the symbolic end of a chapter in the Targaryen Civil War. His fierce loyalty to Daemon and his unmatched prowess in battle made him one of the most memorable dragons in Westerosi history. The battle above the God's Eye, where two of the mightiest dragons ever to live perished, would be remembered as one of the most dramatic events in the Dance of the Dragons, a moment where ambition, vengeance, and the legacy of dragons collided in a final, devastating duel. A prominent theory surrounding Caraxes and his bond with Daemon Targaryen suggests that the two were linked by more than just rider and dragon. Some fans speculate that the intense and almost supernatural connection between Daemon and Caraxes fueled the dragon's bloodthirsty and aggressive nature. According to this theory, Caraxes was not just a reflection of Daemon's ambition, but was affected by the dark and ruthless spirit of his rider. This could explain why Caraxes, despite being smaller than Vhagar, was able to match her in sheer ferocity during their final battle. Whether or not this theory holds true, it underscores the deeply personal connection between dragons and their riders, a bond that goes beyond mere control and into the realm of shared temperament and will. In death, Caraxes' legacy endures as one of the most fearsome dragons to have ever lived. His blood-red scales, serpentine body, and ruthless nature made him a living symbol of the violence and ambition that defined the Targaryen dynasty. Whether remembered for his countless battles or his final fateful duel with Vhagar, Caraxes will forever be known as the Blood Worm, a dragon who fought with every ounce of fire and fury until his last breath. His death, like the death of his rider, marked the end of a chapter in the bloody history of Westeros. But his name continues to inspire fear and awe long after the flames of the Dance of the Dragons have faded. Meleys, known as the Red Queen, wasn't just another dragon in the Targaryen arsenal. She was a force of nature. With her blazing scarlet scales and bright copper horns, she cut a striking figure, a blur of red fire streaking across the skies of Westeros. Fast, fierce, and utterly fearless, Meleys was one of the most formidable dragons of her time. But what truly set her apart wasn't just her beauty, it was her speed. She was a predator, a beast built for war, and in the chaos of the Dance of the Dragons, Meleys stood out as a true weapon of destruction. Ridden by Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the so-called queen who never was, Meleys was a dragon that commanded respect and fear alike. The bond between Rhaenys and her dragon was something deeper than rider and beast. It was a union of power and purpose. Together, they soared into battle with the kind of confidence that only comes when you know you're one of the deadliest beings alive. Meleys, swift as a storm and just as destructive, was a perfect match for Rhaenys' fierce determination and warrior spirit. Meleys wasn't a dragon to hang back or observe the battlefield from a distance. When it came to the blood-soaked skies of the Dance of the Dragons, she dove headfirst into the chaos, fire blazing from her jaws, wings slicing through the air like blades. Her speed was her greatest weapon. Many believed she could outfly any dragon, her strikes as precise as they were deadly. In battle after battle, Meleys was at the center of the storm, a fiery comet laying waste to all who stood in her path. But her most famous and tragic moment came during the battle at Rook's Rest, a confrontation that would seal her place in history. It was here that Meleys faced not one, but two of the deadliest dragons in Westeros. Sunfyre, the golden dragon of King Aegon II, and Vhagar, the ancient, battle-hardened beast ridden by Prince Aemon Targaryen. Rhaenys knew the odds were stacked against her, but retreat was never an option. With meleys beneath her, she charged into battle with the kind of reckless bravery that becomes legend. The skies above Rook's Rest burned as the Red Queen met her enemies head-on. Outnumbered and outmatched, she fought with a ferocity that left those below in awe. Her fire clashed with Sunfyre's golden flames and Vhagar's deadly might, the air thick with the roar of dragons and the smell of scorched earth. Meleys was fast, faster than any dragon on the battlefield, but speed alone wasn't enough against two giants of the sky. Still, she fought like no dragon had ever fought before, diving and weaving between her foes, delivering strike after devastating strike. In the end, it wasn't lack of skill or bravery that brought Meleys down. It was sheer, overwhelming force. Sunfyre and Vhagar, together, proved too much for even the Red Queen. She fell, her body crashing to the earth in a blaze of fire and blood, a spectacle so brutal it would be etched into the memory of all who witnessed it. Rhaenys, her fearless rider, perished alongside her, both bound by fire and fate. The death of Meleys wasn't just a loss for Rhaenyra's cause. It was a blow to the very heart of the Targaryen civil war. The Red Queen had been a symbol of defiance, a reminder that dragons were not just weapons. They were rulers of the sky. And yet, even the mightiest of dragons could fall. There's a theory whispered among historians and dragon enthusiasts that Meleys' downfall wasn't simply a matter of being outnumbered. Some believe that Rhaenys, confident in her dragon's speed and agility, underestimated the brute force of her enemies. This miscalculation may have led to her fateful decision to confront both Sunfyre and Vhagar at once, a decision that, though courageous, proved fatal. Whether or not this theory holds, it adds another layer to the story of a dragon that, even in defeat, fought until her last breath. Meleys' death was a turning point, but her legacy, her ferocity, and sheer will to fight lived on. She was a dragon of unmatched speed and power, a creature that made even her enemies think twice before facing her in the sky. The Red Queen's fall at Rook's Rest was more than just a battle. It was a symbol of how far the Targaryens were willing to go, how much they were willing to sacrifice to win their civil war. In the end, Meleys was a dragon who lived and died on her own terms. Fast, fierce, and unrelenting, she remains one of the most iconic dragons in Westeros. Her scarlet form burned into the memory of the Dance of the Dragons. Her legacy, like the fire she breathed, still burns bright, a testament to the raw, untamable power of the dragons that once ruled the skies. Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, was a name whispered with both reverence and fear throughout Westeros. His bronze scales shimmered like molten metal in the light, his presence a living monument to the might of House Targaryen. Vermithor was a dragon of immense size and power, one of the largest during the Dance of the Dragons, and though he was born for battle, he had spent much of his life in the peace of King Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen's reign. But when war came knocking, Vermithor would rise again, a sleeping giant awakening to wreak havoc upon the world once more. In his early years, Vermithor was the loyal mount of King Jaehaerys I, the longest-reigning Targaryen king who ruled during an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Vermithor's bond with Jaehaerys wasn't forged in the fires of war, but in the quiet moments of rulership, flying across the skies of Westeros as a symbol of the king's might. Though his fire remained unused for much of his life, the Bronze Fury was always there, a reminder to the lords of Westeros that peace was maintained not by words alone, but by the power of dragons. Jaehaerys' reign was long and peaceful, and Vermithor's life reflected that serenity. The Bronze Fury was a dragon built for war, yet he rarely saw it. But beneath his calm exterior was the soul of a beast that remembered the fires of Valyria, the taste of battle, and the thrill of dominance. Though the years of peace softened the dragon's edges, the Dance of the Dragons would soon bring Vermithor back into the fray, proving that even the most dormant of beasts can still unleash devastation when called upon. When the civil war erupted between the factions of Rhaenyra and Aegon II, Vermithor found himself riderless, but not without purpose. As one of the oldest and largest dragons in existence, his return to the battlefield was a game-changer. Despite having lost his longtime rider in King Jaehaerys, Vermithor was too powerful to sit idle during the chaos. He was eventually brought back into battle, a towering reminder of the raw, uncontrollable force that dragons could be. What set Vermithor apart wasn't just his size or his strength, it was his sheer presence. He hadn't been used in battle for years, But when he did return, it was like watching a storm roll over the horizon, slow, methodical, and utterly devastating. Even without the guidance of an experienced rider, Vermithor's ferocity in the air and his destructive breath were unmatched. He was no longer the symbol of peaceful reign. He had become a weapon of war once again, a force unleashed to settle the scores of the Targaryen civil war. The Bronze Fury's most significant and final battle took place at the Second Battle of Tumbleton, one of the bloodiest and most chaotic confrontations in the Dance of the Dragons. This wasn't a simple skirmish. It was an all-out dragon battle, a clash of titans that would see some of the most powerful dragons in history meet their end. Vermithor was there, fighting not just for the Targaryens, but for the legacy of dragons themselves. The battle was chaotic, with dragons tearing into one another in a whirlwind of fire, claws, and wings. Vermithor, despite his age and size, fought with a brutal ferocity that belied his years of peace. But even the largest dragons are not invincible. Vermithor, after delivering devastating blows to his enemies, met his end in this very battle. He faced multiple dragons at once, and though he fought valiantly, the combined forces were too much, even for the Bronze Fury. His death was a spectacle of destruction, a dragon that had once symbolized peace, now falling in a storm of fire and blood. His massive body crashed into the battlefield, bringing with it the weight of a long and storied history. One compelling theory surrounding Vermithor's participation in the Dance of the Dragons is that he wasn't just a passive participant brought into the war due to circumstance. Some speculate that Vermithor's return to battle, despite being riderless for much of the conflict, was a testament to the innate connection between dragons and the Targaryen bloodline. According to this theory, Vermithor may have been drawn to the conflict not by any rider, but by the war itself, by the internal struggle tearing apart the family to which he was bound. His participation without an experienced rider could be seen as an act of loyalty, not to any one person, but to House Targaryen as a whole, fighting for the very bloodline that had once brought him into the world. Whether or not this theory holds, it underscores the deep connection between dragons and their riders, even in times of chaos and loss. Vermithor's death was a reminder that no matter how great or ancient a dragon may be, war is the great equalizer. The Bronze Fury, once a peaceful symbol of Jaehaerys' reign, had become a casualty of a war that was tearing his house apart. But in his final moments, Vermithor didn't go down quietly. He fought with every ounce of fury he had left, leaving his mark on the battlefield and ensuring that his name would be remembered long after the flames of the Dance of the Dragons had been extinguished. For House Targaryen, Vermithor represented both the heights of their power and the depths of their tragedy. He was a dragon that lived through peace but died in war, a beast that had once flown as a symbol of unity but ultimately fell as a victim of division. His legacy, much like his bronze scales, gleamed with the weight of history. Vermithor's story is one of a dragon who, despite being forged for battle, knew peace, and when war came again, he fought with a fury that would be remembered forever. The Bronze Fury, like all great dragons, met his end in a blaze of glory, his massive form collapsing into the earth in the final throes of battle. But his name, his legacy, and his role in shaping the history of Westeros remain as indestructible as the fire that once burned in his veins. Vermithor may have died in the Dance of the Dragons, but his memory soars on a testament to the power and tragedy that defines the dragons of House Targaryen. Dreamfyre was unlike many of the colossal dragons that shaped the history of Westeros. With light blue scales that shimmered like a summer sky and delicate silver markings tracing her body, she was known more for her elegance and grace than for raw power. Smaller than the likes of Balerion or Vhagar, Dreamfyre was a dragon built for agility, soaring through the skies with a beauty and precision that made her a striking figure in Targaryen history. But while she may not have cast the largest shadow, Dreamfyre's legacy is one that extends far beyond her time in battle, intertwined with both the rise and fall of House Targaryen. Dreamfyre first bonded with Princess Rhaena Targaryen, a figure as significant as the dragon she rode. Together, they became a symbol of Targaryen strength, even during times of great upheaval. Rhaena's bond with Dreamfyre was one of grace and power, with the dragon's light blue wings a familiar sight in the skies over Dragonstone and beyond. But it wasn't until later, when Dreamfyre found a new rider, that her story would take on deeper significance. Helaena Targaryen, the sister wife of Aegon II, became her second rider, and the two shared a quiet yet profound connection during one of the most turbulent times in Targaryen history, the Dance of the Dragons. Dreamfyre wasn't known for leading armies into battle or burning cities to the ground. She wasn't a dragon of brute strength or overwhelming destruction. Instead, her role in the Targaryen Civil War was quieter, more subdued, but no less important. Her rider, Helaena, suffered greatly during the dance, her mental state unraveling as the war raged on around her. In the chaos of political intrigue, shifting alliances, and personal loss, Dreamfyre became a constant for Helaena, a symbol of a past that was slipping away with each passing day. Yet even the presence of a dragon as majestic as Dreamfyre couldn't shield Helaena from the tragic fate that awaited her. Grief-stricken and broken by the horrors of the war, Helaena ultimately took her own life, leaving Dreamfyre without a rider once again. Dreamfyre's story, though not filled with the explosive battles of other dragons, carries a unique weight, rooted not in destruction, but in legacy. One of the most intriguing aspects of Dreamfyre's history is her role in the continuation of the dragon bloodline. It is widely believed that Dreamfyre laid many eggs during her life, and some speculate that these eggs may have played a pivotal role in the future of House Targaryen. There are whispers and theories that Dreamfyre's eggs were responsible for hatching some of the last dragons of Westeros, including those that Daenerys Targaryen would eventually bring back into the world. Though this theory remains unconfirmed, it adds an air of mystery to Dreamfyre's story, linking her to the eventual rebirth of dragons in Westeros. The theory that Dreamfyre's eggs could be tied to Daenerys' dragons adds a fascinating dimension to her legacy. It suggests that even though Dreamfyre herself did not participate in many of the defining battles of the Targaryen Civil War, her contribution to the Targaryen dynasty lived on through her offspring. If true, this theory would mean that Dreamfyre's blood coursed through the veins of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, the last dragons of their kind, whose fire would once again shake the foundations of Westeros. But even without the confirmation of such a theory, Dreamfyre's legacy is deeply rooted in the survival of House Targaryen. In an era marked by loss, betrayal, and civil war, she represents the quieter strength of the Targaryens, the perseverance of a family whose fate was tied to the dragons that soared above them. Dreamfyre's elegance in the skies and her bond with her riders reflected a different kind of power. A power that wasn't always measured in fire and blood, but in the continuation of the Targaryen line. There's something almost poetic about Dreamfyre's story. She was a dragon who witnessed the slow unraveling of her house, from the peaceful reigns of earlier Targaryen kings to the devastating civil war that nearly tore them apart. Her flight may not have been filled with the same fire and fury as her larger counterparts, but she was no less significant. In her own way, Dreamfyre helped to preserve the future of her house, ensuring that dragons would continue to play a role in shaping the fate of Westeros, long after her time had passed. For many, Dreamfyre's legacy is defined by her connection to Helaena, a bond that symbolized both beauty and tragedy. The dragon, with her light blue scales, served as a reminder of the glory days of House Targaryen, a time when dragons were symbols of power and prestige. But her story also reflects the sorrow of the Dance of the Dragons, the war that fractured the Targaryen family beyond repair. Helena's death and the role Dreamfyre played in her life is a somber chapter in the history of dragons, one filled with loss and heartache. In the end, Dreamfyre may not have been the dragon that led the charge into battle or reduced entire cities to ash, but she was a dragon of legacy, an emblem of the continuity of House Targaryen's bloodline, and a quiet force of elegance in a world dominated by war. Whether remembered for her graceful flight, her possible role in hatching the dragons of the future, or her bond with Helaena, Dreamfyre's story is one that lingers in the lore of Westeros, a reminder that even the most graceful dragons leave a lasting mark on history. In the world of fire and blood, where dragons are often defined by their size and power, Seasmoke stands as a reminder that agility and quick thinking can be just as deadly. A smaller, younger dragon compared to the behemoths that dominated the skies during the Dance of the Dragons, Seasmoke was unique. His silver-gray scales gleamed like the ocean mist from which he took his name, and while he lacked the sheer mass of dragons like Balerion or Vhagar, his speed and agility made him a force that couldn't be ignored. Seasmoke wasn't born into the same fame as some of the older dragons, but his role in history is no less significant. Bonded with Laenor Velaryon, the dragon became a symbol of Velaryon dominance during the War for the Stepstones, a conflict that shaped much of the political and military landscape of Westeros at the time. Seasmoke's ability to weave through the air, darting past larger and older dragons, made him a crucial asset in battle. He wasn't the dragon you sent to flatten a castle or destroy an army with one pass of fiery breath. He was the dragon you sent when precision, speed, and daring were required. Laenor Velaryon, a key figure in the Targaryen-Velaryon alliance, relied heavily on Seasmoke's abilities during the war. Together, they secured pivotal victories, none more notable than the Siege of Bloodstone. With Daemon Targaryen's forces surrounded and the battle on the brink of collapse, it was Seasmoke who turned the tide. His agility allowed him to swoop down, striking quickly and decisively, freeing Daemon and turning what could have been a disastrous defeat into a strategic victory. It was this kind of tactical precision that made Seasmoke a dragon unlike any other, more of a scalpel than a hammer, cutting through chaos with a sharpness that belied his size. While most dragons are remembered for their overwhelming strength, Seasmoke's story is about finesse. He could maneuver in ways that many larger dragons simply couldn't, his flight patterns more reminiscent of a falcon than a wyvern. It's said that during battle, his silver-gray form was almost impossible to track, disappearing into clouds or the mists of the sea, striking before his enemies even knew he was there. His role in the war for the Stepstones is a testament to how dragons weren't just creatures of brute force. They were creatures of strategy, each with their own unique qualities that made them invaluable in the chaos of war. After Laenor Velaryon faked his own death and disappeared into exile, Seasmoke's story took a quieter turn. Left riderless, he returned to Driftmark, where he became one of the few dragons not claimed during the Dance of the Dragons. There's something almost melancholic about the image of Seasmoke, a dragon once so vital in the throes of battle, now without a rider, circling above the waves off the coast of Driftmark. But even without a rider, Seasmoke remained a presence, silent, patient, and ever watchful, as if waiting for the next chapter of his story to unfold. One theory that has persisted about Seasmoke is tied to his riderless state during the Dance of the Dragons. Some believe that Seasmoke's bond with Laenor was so strong that he refused to accept another rider after Laenor's disappearance. In a time when dragons were seen as tools of war, some suggest that Seasmoke's reluctance to be claimed reflected a deeper intelligence and loyalty, a refusal to bond with anyone other than the man who had faked his own death to escape the violent world that surrounded him. Whether true or not, it adds a layer of complexity to Seasmoke's story, suggesting that dragons, too, have their own sense of agency and connection to the humans they fly with. Seasmoke's time in the spotlight may have been shorter than some of his legendary counterparts, but his impact on the history of Westeros was undeniable. He was a dragon that defied expectations, small, young, but every bit as important as the larger, more celebrated beasts that flew across the battlefield. He saved lives, won wars, and in the end, remained a symbol of loyalty and agility in a world where brute strength often reigned supreme. In the end, Seasmoke's story is a unique one in the history of dragons. While others blazed paths of destruction, he cut through the chaos with the precision of a master tactician. His silver-gray scales, a ghostly figure against the backdrop of war, made him a legend in his own right, not through sheer force, but through the art of battle. Though his rider disappeared and his role in the war came to an end, Seasmoke remained a dragon of the sea and sky, a creature built for speed, strategy, and survival. The dragon's name may not evoke the same awe as the likes of Balerion or Vhagar, but Seasmoke's legacy is just as significant. In a world where might often makes right, Seasmoke proved that sometimes it's the quick, the agile, and the cunning who change the course of history. He was the silent hunter of the skies, a dragon whose story reminds us that even the smallest of creatures can leave the largest of marks. Quicksilver, with his ethereal silver-white scales that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, was a dragon of beauty and agility. His sleek form, though smaller than many of his fellow Targaryen dragons, made him an exceptional creature in battle, capable of swift, decisive strikes. Where some dragons relied on sheer brute force, Quicksilver embodied precision and grace, a dragon that flew through the skies with elegance, but when provoked, could unleash his fire with deadly accuracy. In many ways, he was a reflection of the Targaryens themselves. Dazzling, majestic, and immensely powerful. Quicksilver's story is forever linked to the history of House Targaryen, as both a symbol of their strength and a tragic reminder of the dangers of ambition. Initially bonded with King Aenys, the first Targaryen, Quicksilver represented the lighter side of the Targaryen legacy. Aenys, who ruled during a relatively peaceful period, didn't often call upon Quicksilver for battle, but the dragon remained a symbol of Targaryen might. With his silvery scales gleaming in the skies over Westeros, Quicksilver was a reminder to the realm of the power the Targaryens still held, power that could be unleashed at any moment. But it was Quicksilver's second rider, Prince Aegon, who would define the dragon's place in history. As the son of King Aenys, Aegon inherited his father's bond with Quicksilver, but his reign was destined to be far more tumultuous. Aegon found himself locked in a brutal power struggle with Maegor the Cruel, his uncle who sought to usurp the throne and solidify his own ruthless claim. Maegor, riding the infamous Balerion, the Black Dread, was a force unlike any the Targaryens had ever seen. Unstoppable, brutal, and willing to burn anything in his path to achieve his goals. Quicksilver's most famous and final moment came in the battle beneath the God's Eye, one of the most dramatic dragon duels in Westerosi history. Aegon, mounted on Quicksilver, rode into battle against Maegor and Balerion, knowing full well that he was facing a monster of unimaginable strength. Balerion, with his immense size and centuries of experience, was the most feared dragon in the world. His black wings casting shadows over entire cities, his fire capable of reducing castles to ash in seconds. Quicksilver, though smaller, wasn't a dragon to be underestimated. His agility and speed made him a formidable opponent, darting through the air with a grace that even Balerion couldn't match. As the two dragons clashed in the skies above the God's Eye, it was a battle of two Targaryen ideals. The younger, swifter dragon, relying on precision and agility, against the ancient, unstoppable force that was Balerion. The air crackled with fire and fury as the two dragons spiraled through the clouds, their roars shaking the earth below. But in the end, Quicksilver's speed couldn't overcome Balerion's sheer size and power. Despite his best efforts, Quicksilver was simply no match for the Black Dread. Balerion's massive jaws clamped down on Quicksilver, and in a final devastating moment, he tore one of Quicksilver's wings clean off. The smaller dragon, now crippled, plummeted from the sky, his rider, Prince Aegon, still clinging to him. Both dragon and rider crashed into the waters of the God's Eye, their bodies disappearing beneath the surface, never to be seen again. Quicksilver's death was more than just the loss of a dragon. It was the end of a rebellion, the crushing of a dream. Prince Aegon, like so many Targaryens before and after him, had believed that the strength of dragons alone could win him the Iron Throne. But in the face of Balerion, even a dragon as swift and graceful as Quicksilver stood no chance. The battle at the God's Eye became a defining moment in Targaryen history, a symbol of the brutal cost of power and the inevitable clash between those who wielded it. There's an intriguing theory surrounding Quicksilver and his final battle. Some suggest that Quicksilver's bond with Aegon may have been weaker than that of other Targaryens and their dragons, given the relatively peaceful life Aegon had led up until the civil war with Maegor. According to this theory, Quicksilver, though loyal to his rider, may have been less prepared for the full scale of dragon combat than a battle-hardened dragon like Balerion. While Quicksilver had the speed and agility to compete, he lacked the experience of fighting a dragon of Balerion's magnitude, contributing to his tragic defeat. This theory, while speculative, adds another layer to the narrative of the Targaryens, showing how even dragons, like their riders, can be outmatched by the tides of history. Quicksilver's defeat didn't just mark the end of Aegon's rebellion, it also solidified Maegor's position as the most feared Targaryen ruler of his time. With Quicksilver's bones resting beneath the God's Eye and Aegon dead, Maegor's iron grip on the throne tightened. The once shining symbol of Targaryen strength, Quicksilver's silver-white scales, was gone from the skies, leaving a darker legacy in his place. Yet, despite his tragic end, Quicksilver remains a legendary figure in the annals of dragon history. His ethereal beauty, his speed, and his fierce loyalty to his rider made him one of the most unique dragons to ever fly under the Targaryen banner. Even in death, his story serves as a reminder that in the world of Westeros, power, whether human or dragon, comes at a great cost. Quicksilver may have fallen to the might of Balerion, but his legacy, like the silver light that once danced across his scales, endures. Silverwing wasn't a dragon built for chaos or bloodshed. She was the epitome of elegance, a creature whose very presence seemed to calm the skies as she flew. With shimmering silver scales that caught the light and wings that spread like polished steel, Silverwing reflected a different kind of power, the kind that ruled not by fear, but by awe. She wasn't the largest or the fiercest of dragons, but she carried a quiet majesty, a symbol of a realm at peace under the long reign of King Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen. Ridden by Queen Alicent Targaryen, Silverwing became a part of a legacy that was built not on battlefields, but on diplomacy, reform, and unity. Alicent, beloved by the people, rode her dragon not into war, but across the kingdom, binding Westeros together with loyalty and goodwill. Silverwing, with her silvery wings gliding effortlessly through the air, became an emblem of this golden age of Targaryen rule, a time when the threat of Dragonfire felt distant and prosperity spread from King's Landing to the farthest reaches of the Seven Kingdoms. One of the most famous moments in Silverwing's long life came during Queen Alicent's journey to the Wall. It was there, at the edge of the known world, that Silverwing's connection to the mysteries of the North became legend. Despite Alicent's urging, Silverwing refused to fly beyond the Wall. Each time the dragon was nudged toward the frozen wasteland, she would rear back, turning away from the icy winds and refusing to cross into the unknown. This wasn't an act of stubbornness. It was a reaction to something deeper, something unseen. The tale of Silverwing's refusal to fly north has sparked countless theories over the centuries. Some say she sensed the magic lurking beyond the Wall, the same magic that would one day unleash the Night King and his army of the dead. Others believe it was simply an instinctual reaction to the ancient power that lingered in the frozen north, a remnant of forces long forgotten. Silverwing's reluctance to fly beyond the Wall was more than just a curious anecdote. It became a symbol of the mysteries that even dragons could not unravel. While other dragons are remembered for their roles in battle, Silverwing's legacy is tied to her sensitivity to the unseen forces of the world. It adds a layer of depth to her character, suggesting that even in a creature so powerful, there was an understanding of limits, a sense of when to hold back. After Queen Alysanne's death, Silverwing's life took on a quieter tone. She returned to Dragonstone, where she spent her remaining years without a rider. It was a rare fate for a dragon of her stature, but it speaks to the bond she shared with Alysanne. Without the Queen, Silverwing had no desire for a new rider, no interest in participating in the dance of the dragons that would later tear Westeros apart. She remained a silent guardian of Dragonstone, a relic of a more peaceful time. Though she never took part in the violent struggles that defined so many other dragons' lives, Silverwing's legacy endures in a different way. Her graceful flight, her majestic appearance, and her role as Alysanne's loyal companion have left a lasting impression on the history of Westeros. She was a dragon who soared above the need for war, a creature who, even in a time of dragons and fire, reminded the world that power could be wielded with grace. Silverwing's name may not be synonymous with destruction, but her story is just as significant. She represented the best of what House Targaryen could be, a force that didn't need to burn cities to command respect. And though her time was marked by peace, the mysteries that surrounded her, especially her refusal to cross the wall, have kept her legend alive long after her silver wings last graced the skies of Westeros. Sunfyre was no ordinary dragon. His golden scales gleamed like molten sunlight, his wings stretching wide with a hue of pink that shimmered in the daylight. There was a certain majesty to him, a brilliance that made him one of the most visually striking dragons to ever take flight in Westeros. Dubbed Sunfyre the Golden, he wasn't just a dragon of strength, he was a living, breathing symbol of royalty, a creature whose very presence commanded attention. For King Aegon II Targaryen, Sunfyre was more than just a mount. He was the embodiment of the king's ambition and power, a dragon as golden and regal as the crown Aegon wore. The bond between Aegon II and Sunfyre ran deep, their connection forged in fire and blood. Aegon chose Sunfyre not only for his beauty, but for the sheer power that lay beneath those shimmering scales. The king even incorporated Sunfyre's dazzling golden form into his personal sigil, a three-headed dragon with scales of gold, a reflection of his own belief that he was the true and rightful ruler of Westeros. But as beautiful as Sunfyre was, his true value lay in battle, where his radiant appearance often belied the ferocity that lurked within. During the bloody civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons, Sunfyre proved that his beauty was matched by his strength. In several key battles, he fought valiantly at Aegon's side, his golden fire scorching the enemies of his rider. One of the most defining moments of his life came at the Battle of Rook's Rest. It was here that Sunfyre, alongside the monstrous Vhagar, faced off against Meleys, the Red Queen, a dragon nearly as feared as Vhagar herself. The sky above Rook's Rest burned that day, filled with the clash of dragons and fire, and it was in this battle that Sunfyre helped secure a decisive victory. Alongside Vhagar, Sunfyre unleashed his fire upon Meleys, and together they brought down the Red Queen, cementing his place as one of the deadliest dragons in the war. Yet despite his triumphs, Sunfyre's story was not one of unbroken victory. During the war, Sunfyre sustained devastating injuries, wounds that would eventually lead to his tragic downfall. The majestic dragon, once the pride of the skies, found himself crippled after a brutal encounter. His wings, once magnificent and radiant, were torn and battered, leaving him grounded and vulnerable. Though he survived the initial attack, the wounds never truly healed, and Sunfyre, who had once flown through the air with effortless grace, became a shadow of his former self. Despite his injuries, Sunfyre remained fiercely loyal to Aegon II, continuing to fight for his king even as his body weakened. He was no longer the invincible creature he had once been, but his spirit remained unbroken. In one of the war's final acts of defiance, Sunfyre, though wounded and grounded, managed to kill a smaller dragon, Grey Ghost, in a desperate fight. It was a reminder that even in his weakened state, Sunfyre was still a force to be reckoned with, a dragon whose fire burned just as brightly, even as his strength faded. Sunfyre's death came slowly, a result of the wounds that never fully healed. The golden dragon, who had once been the pride of Aegon's army, succumbed to his injuries, dying in the shadow of the war he had fought so valiantly in. His passing marked the end of a dragon who had been both beautiful and deadly, a creature whose legacy would live on long after the flames of the Dance of the Dragons had been extinguished. The tragedy of Sunfyre lies not only in his death, but in the fall from grace that preceded it. A dragon as radiant and powerful as Sunfyre, reduced to a crippled state, grounded and unable to take flight, speaks to the larger theme of the Dance of the Dragons itself, the cost of ambition, the toll of war, and the way power, no matter how dazzling, eventually fades. Sunfyre's beauty was unmatched, but in the end, even the most stunning creatures are not immune to the ravages of time and conflict. There's an enduring theory that Sunfyre's injuries, particularly the ones sustained after his clash with Meleys, may have been worsened by internal conflict within Aegon's camp. Some speculate that Aegon, in his paranoia and desperation to hold onto the throne, may have pushed Sunfyre beyond his limits, using the dragon in battles he was no longer capable of fighting. According to this theory, Sunfyre's loyalty to Aegon was his undoing, as the king's ambition forced the dragon to fight when he should have been resting, exacerbating his wounds. Whether this is true or not, it adds a layer of tragedy to Sunfyre's already heartbreaking end. A dragon as loyal as he was magnificent, brought low by the very ruler he served. In the end, Sunfyre remains one of the most iconic dragons in Westeros history. His golden scales, his unwavering loyalty, and his role in the bloody civil war that tore the Targaryen dynasty apart have left an indelible mark on the story of dragons and kings. He wasn't just a dragon of battle, he was a dragon of royalty, a creature whose very presence radiated power and majesty. And though his final years were marked by suffering and decline, Sunfyre's legacy is one of fire, loyalty, and the tragic cost of power. Viserion, the Blue Queen, was a sight to behold. Her cobalt blue scales shimmered like the deepest ocean, and her claws, crest, and belly glowed with a dazzling copper sheen. She was a dragon of unmatched beauty, her presence in the skies drawing eyes wherever she flew. But beneath that striking exterior was a dragon built for war. Viserion might not have been as massive as some of the older dragons, but she was fierce, agile, and commanded the battlefield with a presence that belied her youth. Her title, the Blue Queen, wasn't just for her appearance. It was a reflection of the authority and strength she brought to battle, even at a young age. Viserion was bonded with Prince Daeron Targaryen, known throughout history as Daeron the Daring. Daeron, though young himself, was one of the most fearless Targaryens to take part in the bloody civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons. Together, the young prince and his Blue Queen became an iconic pair, riding into battle with a boldness that would cement Daeron's place in history. Viserion, swift and agile in the air, became an extension of Daeron's daring spirit, and though she wasn't the largest dragon on the battlefield, her presence was felt in every conflict she entered. During the Dance of the Dragons, Viserion proved her mettle in several key battles, but it was the Second Battle of Tumbleton where she made her greatest impact. Tumbleton was a chaotic, brutal conflict, a clash of dragons, steel, and fire that would leave a lasting scar on the history of Westeros. In this battle, Viserion went up against two of the most fearsome dragons of the age, Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, and Silverwing, both battle-hardened beasts with long histories of war. Though Viserion was younger and smaller than her opponents, her agility gave her an edge, allowing her to dart through the skies, striking with precision. The battle was fierce, a deadly dance of fire and wings as the dragons tore through the sky above Tumbleton. Viserion, with her cobalt scales glinting in the sun, fought valiantly, her copper-tipped wings slicing through the air as she delivered fiery blows to her enemies. But the odds were against her. Vermithor, with his massive size and battle experience, was a formidable opponent, and Silverwing's grace and strength only added to the challenge. Despite the Blue Queen's speed and tenacity, she found herself outmatched in the end. Viserion's final moments in the battle were as tragic as they were heroic. Fatally wounded, she continued to fight, refusing to succumb to the injuries that ravaged her body. Even as the battle turned against her, Viserion's will remained unbroken, her fire still burning brightly as she took to the skies one last time. Her loyalty to Daeron and her fighting spirit became a symbol of the Targaryen dragon's role in the Civil War, a reminder that, despite their immense power, even dragons were not invincible. Viserion's death at Tumbleton was a significant blow to Daeron and the Targaryen forces. Her loss was more than just the fall of a dragon. It was a symbol of the tragic cost of the Dance of the Dragons, a war that pitted family against family and dragon against dragon. Her body, once so full of life and beauty, fell to the ground, a testament to the bloody conflict that had torn Westeros apart. But even in death, Viserion's legacy endured. She was one of the few dragons whose courage and determination continued to inspire long after the fires of the dance had burned out. There's a theory that adds an interesting layer to Viserion's story. Some believe that her bond with Daeron was stronger than that of most dragon rider pairs, and that this connection contributed to her exceptional fighting spirit in her final moments. According to this theory, Viserion's refusal to give up, even as she was fatally wounded, wasn't just a display of her own courage, but a reflection of Daeron's indomitable will. It suggests that Viserion fought not just for herself, but for her rider, pushing past her own limits because of the deep bond they shared. While it's impossible to know for sure, the idea that Viserion's final stand was as much about loyalty as it was about survival, adds an extra layer of tragedy to her death. Viserion may not have lived as long as some of the other dragons, but her legacy as the Blue Queen is as enduring as the cobalt scales that once gleamed in the skies of Westeros. She fought with the heart of a warrior, her agility and strength making her a formidable force even against larger dragons. Her death at Tumbleton was a reminder of the devastating toll that the Dance of the Dragons took on the realm and on the dragons themselves. In the annals of Westeros, Viserion's story is one of beauty, strength, and sacrifice. Her cobalt blue scales and copper claws were a striking image in the chaos of war, and her loyalty to Daeron the Daring made her a legend in her own right. Though her time was cut short, Viserion's impact on the war and on those who witnessed her in battle is undeniable. The Blue Queen flew with grace and fought with fire, leaving behind a legacy as fierce and unforgettable as the dragon herself. The story of Arrax is not one of dominance or unmatched power, but one of loyalty and tragic fate. Where larger dragons commanded the skies with sheer force, Arrax was a dragon who flew into history because of his bond with his rider and the tragic outcome of a single mission. Small by comparison to the likes of Balerion or Vhagar, Arrax's strength lay in his loyalty, a quality that would ultimately place him at the center of one of the most heartbreaking moments in the Dance of the Dragons. Lucerys Velaryon, the second son of Rhaenyra Targaryen, rode Arrax as he embarked on a critical mission to secure alliances for his mother's claim to the Iron Throne. Despite his youth and the smaller size of his dragon, Lucerys was trusted with a dangerous task: to deliver a message to Storm's End, where he was to convince Lord Boros Baratheon to support Rhaenyra's cause in the Targaryen Civil War. It was a mission of diplomacy, but in the turbulent world of the Dance of the Dragons, even diplomatic missions carried the threat of violence. Arrax was a young dragon, still growing into his full strength. His silver-white scales, though striking, were not enough to intimidate the older and more powerful dragons that filled the skies of Westeros. But Lucerys and Arrax shared a bond, one built on trust and loyalty, qualities that would be tested to their limits when they arrived at Storm's End. Upon landing, Lucerys found that the situation had already taken a dark turn. His rival, Aemon Targaryen, had arrived before him, and his dragon, Vhagar, was waiting. Vhagar was not just a dragon. She was a living weapon, the largest and oldest dragon in existence, and her presence cast a long shadow over the storm-battered fortress. Aemond and Lucerys had a bitter history, one fueled by personal grievances. The tension between them was palpable, and despite the intentions of diplomacy, violence was never far from the surface. Aemond, seeking revenge for the loss of his eye at Lucerys' hand years earlier, taunted the young prince, demanding that Lucerys pay for the injury. But Lucerys, mindful of his duty, attempted to leave peacefully, mounting Arrax and taking to the skies as the storm above Shipbreaker Bay intensified. What followed was not diplomacy, but a desperate flight for survival. Aemond, enraged and hungry for revenge, mounted Vhagar and pursued Lucerys and Arrax through the storm. The chase was one of the most harrowing moments in the history of the Dance of the Dragons. Arrax, though quick and nimble, was no match for the immense size and power of Vhagar. The storm raged around them, lightning flashing and winds howling as the two dragons darted through the sky. In a final desperate act of defiance, Arrax unleashed a burst of flame toward Vhagar, attempting to hold his ground against the larger beast. But the outcome was inevitable. Vhagar, with her enormous size and overwhelming strength, caught up to the smaller dragon. In a brutal and decisive moment, Vhagar bit Arrax in half, sending Lucerys and his dragon plunging into the stormy waters below. Both were lost to the sea, their bodies never recovered. The death of Arrax, and with him Lucerys, marked a turning point in the civil war, igniting a wave of vengeance that would only deepen the already bloody conflict. Arrax's story is one of tragedy, a young dragon thrust into a war that he was not equipped to survive. His death, along with that of his rider, symbolized the futility of the war that had engulfed the Targaryens, a war that pitted dragon against dragon and family against family. Despite his smaller size and relative inexperience, Arrax's final flight became one of the most memorable moments of the Dance of the Dragons, a testament to the courage and loyalty that defined dragonkind, even in the face of impossible odds. Theories have circulated about Arrax's final moments, with some suggesting that the storm itself played a part in the dragon's fate. It's been speculated that the wild and uncontrollable nature of the storm may have made it harder for Arrax to evade Vhagar, as the winds and lightning disoriented the smaller dragon, while Vhagar, with her immense size, was able to power through the storm with greater ease. Others believe that Lucerys' own fear may have transferred to Arrax, weakening the bond between them and making it harder for the dragon to perform at his best. While these theories remain speculative, they add layers of depth to the already tragic story of Arrax's demise. In the end, Arrax's legacy is one of loyalty and sacrifice. His bond with Lucerys, though cut tragically short, was one of trust and courage, even in the face of overwhelming danger. His death at the hands of Vhagar became one of the sparks that fueled the fire of vengeance and further violence in the Dance of the Dragons. Arrax may not have been the largest or most fearsome dragon, but his story is a reminder of the price paid by even the youngest and smallest dragons in the brutal conflict that consumed House Targaryen. The dragons of Game of Thrones are more than just creatures of myth. They are central to the history, power, and identity of House Targaryen. From the time of Aegon the Conqueror, when dragons first brought Westeros under one rule, to the final days of Daenerys Targaryen, these magnificent beasts shaped the fate of empires and left an indelible mark on the world. Their stories, each as unique and compelling as the riders who sat upon them, paint a picture of creatures as powerful as they are tragic, and as central to the lore of Game of Thrones as the Iron Throne itself. Each dragon, from the mighty Balerion the Black Dread to the fiercely independent Drogon, was a force to be reckoned with. They were not just weapons of war, but symbols of the unbreakable bond between dragon and rider, a relationship that transcended mere control and ventured into realms of loyalty, trust, and deep connection. These dragons were also symbols of House Targaryen's dominance, embodying the fire and blood that fueled their rise to power. And yet, for all their strength, even dragons were subject to the whims of their riders and the harsh realities of the world they lived in. Over the centuries, the dragons played roles in conquests, civil wars, and personal journeys. Balerion, with his shadow that could engulf entire towns, helped forge the Iron Throne with his fiery breath, while Vhagar, centuries later, flew into battle during the Targaryen Civil War. Dragons like Silverwing, who represented peace and stability during the long reign of King Jaehaerys I, showed that dragons were more than mere engines of destruction. They were also companions, trusted confidants, and symbols of prosperity. Meanwhile, the younger dragons such as Rhaegal and Viserion highlighted the deep emotional bonds forged between the dragons and the last Targaryens. The tragedy of dragons in Game of Thrones lore lies not only in their power, but in the way that power was often misused or misunderstood. While dragons like Drogon helped Daenerys Targaryen rise to power and claim her destiny, they were also central to some of the most devastating moments in the story, moments where fire and blood consumed entire cities, and the fate of entire kingdoms shifted in an instant. These creatures, so intimately tied to House Targaryen, bore witness to the rise and fall of dynasties, and their own extinction was as much a part of that downfall as any human betrayal. For all their grandeur, dragons were not invincible. Their lives were marked by battles, and their deaths were often as dramatic as their lives. Dragons like Meleys, the Red Queen, fought valiantly but were overwhelmed by larger, more powerful foes, while others like Arrax died defending their riders in hopeless battles. Even the largest dragons, such as Vhagar, met their ends in fiery clashes that left the skies filled with smoke and ash, forever altering the world beneath them. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of dragons in Game of Thrones is their mystique. The stories of Dreamfyre's eggs possibly hatching Daenerys' dragons, Silverwing's refusal to fly beyond the wall, or the theories surrounding the reanimated Viserion raise questions about what dragons truly are: creatures of raw power or beings connected to forces beyond understanding. Their intelligence, loyalty, and capacity for destruction all feed into the mythos that surrounds them, making dragons more than mere animals. They are beings of legend, tied to the very fabric of Westeros' history and its future.